how we can actually engage people in an inclusive manner. And one of the things that I emphasize is the notion of using inclusive language. And I'm going to start by talking about two things that you want to avoid. The first thing I'm going to suggest you avoid are analogies. And I'll get into why momentarily. So that's the first thing I'm going to suggest you avoid are analogies. The second thing I'm going to suggest you avoid are jargon and slang, or slang and jargon, however you want to articulate that. Let's start with analogies. And I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox about this. But analogies get on my nerves. They really annoy me. And I'm going to tell you exactly why analogies annoy me. Because they're almost always bad. There's a reason they don't work most of the time, and it's a very simple reason. In order for an analogy to work, which is basically when you're doing an analogy, you're taking something that you assume to be universally understood and using it to explain something else. But the problem is the assumption. It only works when the person who is articulating the analogy has the same cultural frame of reference as the person who is hearing the analogy. If they do, and they have similar experiences relative to the thing that they're using as the comparison, then it can work just fine. The problem is, when you're dealing with cultural differences, a lot of times there's different cultural frame of reference. There's different perspectives, there's different ways of thinking of things. So analogies often fall flat. They just don't work because of that. Analogies, metaphors, similes, they just don't work really effectively for describing the things that we want to describe. I'm also going to suggest that you not use slang or jargon simply because, once again, that works fine when people are very similar to you in terms of experience or similar in terms of an organization, because we all have our own acronyms. It's one of the fun things I have as a consultant is learning people's acronyms. We have an AEC meeting this morning. We have an MJF planning session tomorrow. And I have no idea what any of this stuff means, but over time you get to learn that. So I'm going to suggest that if you want to utilize inclusive language, you make sure that you're not using those terms and things of that nature when you're working outside your particular group. Now, what can you do? Use stories. Stories are very powerful, and stories do not require a similar frame of reference. Stories are very humanizing. The way I like to articulate this is that stories are really a form of self-disclosure. And self-disclosure is simply a way of talking about how you've had similar experiences to the person you're trying to connect with or to the group that you're trying to connect with. And they're able to see you in a different light, recognizing that, yes, he or she can relate to where I'm coming from. Stories allow us to do that because they're universal. When we talk about a difficulty that we've had with a family member, when we talk about a difficulty we've had in the workplace, people can relate to that. Because virtually everyone has had a difficulty with a family member or difficulty in the workplace. They work much more effectively. And the other thing that works effectively are real-life, pertinent examples, meaning using examples that will connect with people in your audience. Sometimes we use examples that aren't the best connections, and that won't work real well, but if you use examples that connect well with the people in the audience, it works much more effectively. I tell some stories, but I'm the person that uses a lot of examples. I find that they're very, very powerful because you help to create a picture for people. I can talk to you about internal noise and say internal noise is noise that happens within, but that doesn't necessarily give you a great picture of it. But when I talk about having something on your mind and then having difficulty being in the moment as you're trying to engage an individual, as you're trying to engage an audience, then you can better have a picture of, yes, I've experienced this internal noise, and now I have a better sense of what I need to deal with as I interact with people, both individually and in groups. Making sense? You know, that's my thing. Make sense? Okay.